Imagine a city so sacred, so impregnable, yet abandoned from within long before the enemy's siege even begins. Let me take you back to Jerusalem, around 66 to 67 AD. The city stood at the height of its glory, white marble glinting in the sunlight, golden finials catching the dawn. Its temple, rebuilt over decades, considered one of the crowning wonders of the ancient world. Pilgrims poured in by the hundreds of thousands, trade flourished, and the city's pulse beat strong. Yet beneath this veneer of power, something unexpected was stirring. Entire Christian families slipped away quietly, steadily, leaving behind walls, altars, and familiar streets. The historian Eusebius of Caesarea would later write that nearly the entire Christian community fled to Pella, over the hills, in what is now Jordan. Why? Because they read signs others refused to see. As pious crowds chanted prayers and as Jewish leaders rallied resistance against Rome, these Christians saw omens, political tremors, divine warnings, and chose flight over martyrdom. They did not wait for prophecy to fulfill itself. They acted. When Titus and his legions arrived in 70 AD, the city rumbled with the ardor of revolt. But curiously, there was one thing missing. No Christian voices echoed in its streets. Their absence would become as telling as their resistance. They had escaped the storm that swallowed Jerusalem whole. That dramatic exodus was more than survival. It marked a rupture, a departure in flesh and spirit. From that moment, the followers of Jesus would begin to chart a path apart from Jewish identity, stepping into a new religious future. And in the shadows of those walls, another drama was unfolding, a story of siege, betrayal, starvation, and fire. Now, join me as we walk to the gates of the Roman narrative, through the eyes of generals, prophets, and the desperate souls trapped inside. When Titus stood before Jerusalem's walls, he understood something critical. He wasn't simply facing stone and mortar. He was facing a people's pride and their divisions. One, the three walls and the mind behind the fortress. To the untrained eye, Jerusalem's defenses seemed insurmountable. Three concentric walls rose in tiers, each one stronger, higher, more formidable than the last. The outer wall stood some 13 meters high and 3 meters thick. Behind it, another wall soared, and the third, guarding the temple itself, was rumored to be built by giants. The architect of Herod had used every trick of terrain, masonry, and engineering available to them. Titus walked the perimeter for 2 long days, analyzing angles, towers, possible axes of attack, while his legions formed silent order behind him. He had seen campaigns in Gaul, Britain, Judea. But this was different. The walls weren't passive obstacles. They were traps, gates doubled back. Towers could shoot down attackers into death zones. Valleys fell steeply away on the east. Ravines beckoned on the west and south. Only the north offered relatively flatter ground, but there stood the fortress Antonia, nested inside the wall, defending the approach to the temple courtyard. So how would one breach the unbreachable? By not breaching at all. Titus's real insight came from Josephus, the former Jew-turned-Roman ally. Josephus had defected earlier, and he knew the city from the inside. Its hidden passages, its walls' weak stones, its political fractures. More important, he understood that the greatest fissure was not in the masonry, but in the hearts of the defenders. 2. Civil war within the walls. While the Roman siege lines tightened outside, inside Jerusalem, a far deadlier fight was already underway. 3 Jewish factions, each vying for dominance, were at deadly odds. Joan of Giscala commanded control of large portions of the upper city and held the temple precincts. Simon bar Giora led tens of thousands in the lower city. Eleazar ben Simon entrenched himself in the inner sanctum with a few thousand faithful. History remembers that these factions fought each other more ferociously than they fought the Romans. Their leaders lit fires in each other's warehouses, raided food stores, and refused to unite under a single command, even when emissaries from Rome guaranteed safe exit for civilians. One dramatic episode. During the Passover season, when Jerusalem swelled with pilgrims, Eleazar opened the temple gates under the pretext of joint worship. In reality, Joan's men rushed in and massacred Eleazar's followers inside their sacred precinct. Blood spilled on altars once meant for peace. Josephus reports that the defenders initially had around 25,000 well-equipped soldiers and large stores of grain and supplies, enough to hold out for years. But they didn't. Instead, they turned their strength inward. 3. Hunger, despair, and collapse. As the siege stretched on, famine tightened its grip. Faction would burn the grain stocks of another, hoping to force consolidation. In burnt warehouses, supplies vanished. What remained, if any, became priced at lunatic rates. A measure of wheat once worth 4 drachmas soared over 20 times its price, or vanished altogether. What followed shocked even hardened Roman veterans. People eating anything, roots, animal hides, even excrement. Children were starved. Parents fought over scraps. The sacred structure of family unraveled in terror. One of the most harrowing stories involves Maria, from the village of Bethesda. Stripped of property, fleeing to Jerusalem with her infant, she ultimately killed and cooked her own child, consuming half and hiding the rest. When hungry raiders broke into her house, she offered the flesh. They fled in disgust. The news spread like wildfire among both Jews and Romans. Titus, appalled, is said to have declared he did not wish to be remembered as a general who drove a mother to such an act. He renewed calls for surrender, but the leaders refused. Josephus argues that Jerusalem died not by Roman arms, but by moral implosion. The siege only hastened what internal division had already begun. For final breach and the burning of the temple. By August 9th, 70 AD, Roman forces breached the outer wall. They poured into the temple precinct by dawn. Resistance concentrated in the inner courts, men with nothing to lose, fighting tooth and nail. As soldiers advanced deeper, a flame appeared. A torch flung into the sanctuary interior ignited cedar beams, resinous wood, and golden ornamentation. The fire spread with horrifying speed. That date, the 9th of AV in the Jewish calendar, coincidentally matched the ancient destruction of Solomon's temple 656 years earlier. Chroniclers on both sides viewed this as a prophetic echo, a tragedy repeating itself. The temple burned for 3 days. Marble cracked under heat. Molten gold poured into fissures. Romans tore down stone by stone to reclaim precious metal. In the end, not one stone remained intact. Titus attempted to contain the fire. Tacitus later confirms he ordered soldiers to fight the flames. But it was too late. The glory of Herod's temple was razed, to be displayed as trophies across Rome. 5. Aftermath, slavery, diaspora, and legacy. The siege had staggering human cost. Over 1.1 million died, including pilgrims and refugees crowded into the city. 97,000 were enslaved. The fittest were sent to work mines in Egypt. Craftsmen and intellectuals sold in Roman markets. Children adopted into Roman families. Around 700 of the boldest, imposing, dignified captives were marched in Titus's triumph parade in Rome. Many later died in spectacles or the gladiatorial pits. Jerusalem was leveled, walls demolished, palaces razed. Only 3 towers of Herod's fortress remained, silent witnesses to the city's devastation. Meanwhile, a new tax, the Fiscus Judaicus, imposed on all Jews of the empire, replaced the old temple tax. Jews were scattered across the Mediterranean world, Rome, Alexandria, Babylon, cementing the diaspora that would define the Jewish people for centuries. And for Christians who had long departed, this catastrophe became powerful proof that their exodus had been timely and divinely guided. Their absence left no Christian martyrs in the siege. Their faith continued, now increasingly separated from its Jewish roots, forging ahead as a new religious movement. As we pause at the smoldering ruins, we feel the weight of history, the clash of empires, faiths, humanity. The stage is set for a conclusion that contemplates not only what was destroyed, but what was born anew. The year was 70 AD, but the echoes of that summer would reverberate for millennia. The fires of Jerusalem didn't just consume a city. They consumed an entire chapter of faith, identity, and destiny. And from those ashes, something new began to rise. 1. Rome's triumph and the price of victory. When Titus returned to Rome, he was hailed as a hero. A triumphal procession marched through the Via Sacra, led by trumpets, banners, and captives from the east. Behind him rumbled wagons carrying treasures taken from the temple, the golden menorah, the table of showbread, and other sacred relics. The crowd cheered, marveling at Rome's glory. To them, this was proof of divine favor. The gods had once again chosen Rome. But victory carries its own curse. Inside Titus's eyes, perhaps, burned memories not of triumph but of fire. He had seen the temple fall, heard the screams of the starving city, and realized that empires, too, are built on fragile faith. Ironically, while he was celebrated as conqueror, he would die only a few years later, at just 39, leaving historians to wonder whether he ever truly believed in Rome's victory. And back in the East, the ruins of Jerusalem remained silent, scorched, and sacred in their devastation. 2. The long shadow of the diaspora. The Jewish people scattered across the world, to Alexandria, Babylon, Rome, and beyond. Synagogues replaced the temple. Prayer replaced sacrifice. In exile, their identity hardened into resilience. They carried not stones, but scripture, and through that, their nation survived without a homeland. Meanwhile, in small gatherings across the Mediterranean, the followers of Jesus met quietly in homes and catacombs. They broke bread, prayed, and shared stories that began in Jerusalem, but would one day transform the entire Roman world. Within 3 centuries, the empire that had raised the temple would declare Christianity its official faith. The cross replaced the eagle. The persecuted became the priests of empire. And history, always ironic, completed its circle. 3. Lessons from the empire and the ruins. What can we learn from it all? Empires rise on power, but they fall on pride. Cities may burn, but ideas, faith, conviction, hope can outlive stone, iron, and sword. Jerusalem's fall was not the end of belief. It was a test of it. Rome's legions conquered land after land, but no army could conquer the human spirit. Even in defeat, even in exile, the people carried within them something indestructible, a vision of God, justice, and redemption that no emperor could erase. Perhaps that is the ultimate paradox of Rome. The same empire that sought to destroy a faith became a vessel through which that faith spread across continents. History, it seems, doesn't move in straight lines. It turns, folds, and rewrites itself, until, centuries later, we realize that the ruins we mourn are often the foundations of what comes next. Somewhere, beneath layers of time, beneath stones and silence, the voices of Jerusalem still whisper that faith cannot be burned and that even ashes can speak. Because in the story of Rome and Jerusalem, we don't just see the fall of the city. We see the birth of endurance, the cost of arrogance, and the eternal dance between empire and faith.